The United States of America has greatly expanded at the expense of the Bourbon Empire. First, with their seizure of Florida, and second, with the Canada Purchase. The USA has nearly doubled in size in just a couple of decades. Seeking to reconquer territories that they had lost, and wishing to restore their prestige after being humiliated by the continuous territorial losses, the Bourbons throw themselves into war with the United States once again. The Bourbons had desperately sought to reclaim their lands, enslaving those the Americans had so recently freed. This war was one of independence. As if the Americans had lost their recent gains, they had returned to the status of a client state of the Bourbons. Will the Bourbons manage to defeat the Americans? Will this war escalate beyond the continent? How will the world react to the proclamation of the French Empire? Welcome to episode 3 of Project Bourbon, an alternate Napoleonic timeline. If you're very confused, I would recommend going to episode 1, maybe the pilot episode if you want. The link to the playlist will be up in the top right corner for you to choose. With that being said, let's get back into the chapter. While the First Bourbon-American War was quick, the second would be much more bloody. The Bourbons may have still been attempting to subdue the secessionists of the South, but they had a lot more combat experience as compared to the last war. Especially with the help of the British, who joined this war after an American militia accidentally attacked a British garrison in their North American holdings. In our timeline, the Louisiana Purchase gave America a ton of land that they could colonize and integrate into their union as proper Americans. This is mostly because there were not many French settlements in the Louisiana Territory. New Orleans and the surrounding area would be full of culturally French people, and they still make up a large part of the states that they reside in to this day. However, Quebec was far more developed than New Orleans, and this would be the case even more so considering our point of divergence. It was unlikely that the states of the Union would consider allowing Canada in as a state of itself. This is because the white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant states would not be a big fan of the Catholic French due to cultural and religious conflicts. There was another political element that was impacting America's policy regarding Canadian statehood: the slavery debate. As we know, America practiced in the slave trade. The issue of slavery was determined on a state-by-state basis as to avoid properly addressing the issue. The slave states feared that if there were too many free states in the Union, they would eventually overtake the slave states in influence and ban slavery. Due to geographical reasons, plantations which slaves could effectively work were warm, more so than states. While the Louisiana Purchase had afforded a lot of land for new slave states to spring, there was no land suitable for slavery in Canada. Therefore, the southern states would be heavily invested in expanding against the Bourbons in order to create more slave states. Due to these reasons, the anti-Manifest Destiny, anti-slavery, Protestant, and conservative Federalist Party would be anti-war with the Bourbons or British. These Federalists would even go so far as to convene regarding the potential secession of the Union in 1812. Since this war is occurring in 1803, it's too early for these sentiments to boil over. All of these factors would weigh into how the war would play out. While it was defensive, the slave owners could have an opportunity to perpetuate their institution, impacting the Canadian Territory's chance to become a full state, and the Federalists' willingness to participate in the war. The American president would attempt to keep the balance between these conflicting factions as the war continued. They needed a decisive victory, one that would give them an unquestionable advantage and afford them the ability to set the terms of their victory in a way that suits the Union best. This decisive victory would be gained if the Americans were able to seize New Orleans. The main battles of the war would all involve the Mississippi River in one way or another, but the only way the Americans could use the river to its full potential would be to seize New Orleans. New Orleans is the former capital of the Viceroyalty of New France. This is because of its incredible geographical position. The controller of New Orleans controlled the flow of trade and military logistics from the Caribbean Ocean through to the many tributaries of the Mississippi. The Bourbons and Americans were both incredibly aware of this fact, and a long, bloody battle to seize New Orleans would ensue. Napoleon was able to crown himself emperor because he re-established the papacy. While the revolution was ongoing, the Catholic Church had put their unwavering support into the Bourbon exiles. However, by overseeing the coronation of Napoleon, they have effectively broken their support of the Bourbons. Of course, the Bourbon exiles were furious. They claimed that the Napoleonic restoration of the papacy was illegitimate, and therefore his claim to the French Empire. Following this logic, The Bourbons had set up their own pope, claiming him to be the proper pope of Catholicism. The Catholic Church's holdings in the Bourbon colonies were quickly subsumed into this new Mexican church. In order to alleviate the transition of religious authority, the Mexican Pope had recognized the Marian apparition of Guadalupe as legitimate. Our Lady of Guadalupe was a Marian apparition that appeared to Native Americans in Guadalupe, who recognized her as the mother of the true God. This apparition was recognized in order to appeal to the populace, significantly endearing the locals to their new religious authority. While the subjects of the Bourbons would be pleased with this development, their allies of Brazil would be appalled. They may have recognized the Bourbon claim to France far more than Napoleon's, but by establishing their own pope and recognizing Marian apparitions, which is usually considered heretical, they had gone a bridge too far. The Portuguese exiles would break their alliance with the Bourbons, seizing the lands the Bourbons had promised them and recognized the independence of Peru and La Plata. Due to the Bourbons' preoccupation with the USA and their war, they had to recognize Peruvian and La Platan independence, and did not pursue any action against the Brazilians. They did manage to eventually suppress the Grand Colombian Revolution. Simón Bolívar would evacuate to Peru, where he would remain until another opportunity to liberate Latin America had presented itself. After Napoleon proclaimed himself French Emperor, the Iberian government was appalled. The previously united front between Iberia and France had become incredibly tenuous. If it weren't for the fact that Iberia had been at war with the Bourbons, British and Portuguese, they would have taken action to ensure the continued existence of the revolutionary effort in France. But even if they weren't diplomatically compromised, they were still mired by the internal instability issues. In Spain and Portugal, there were many who sought to re-establish their exiled monarchs, supported by the British and the Bourbon Portuguese exiles. Iberia would remain paralyzed diplomatically and militarily, as they sought to stabilize their young republic. The Battle of New Orleans raged on, with the fate of the continent hanging in the balance. The Bourbons would resist the advance of the Americans, but would soon be able to turn the tide, as reinforcements from the Viceroyalty of New Granada had approached the American front. Due to the bloodshed on both sides of the conflict, each nation was beginning to face yet more resistance. For example, the Native Confederacy of the Great Lakes would take action against the Americans. Tecumseh was a prominent Native American who had championed the idea of a Native American Confederacy to halt the colonization of their lands and potentially expel the colonizers altogether. A demonstration of their anti-colonizer ideology is illustrated with the refusal of allowing for the Métis to join their confederation. The Métis are a people who live in the plains of modern-day Canada and the USA, whose heritage comes from intermarriage between the French settlers and local tribes. Tenswakata, Tecumseh's younger brother, had viewed the Métis with disgust due to their impure blood. This left the Métis isolated. While Tenswakata was anti-Métis, it's plausible that Tecumseh would see past their differences and invite them into the Confederation. In order to keep the Métis loyal to them, the Bourbons would grant them autonomy as civilized natives. While the Bourbons would be making these actions against the Native Confederacy, the British would support it. While they would explain to the Bourbons that this is only to improve their chances against the Americans, the truth regarding British intentions with the Bourbons would become painfully obvious after the outcome of the Haitian Revolution. While the revolt would have been ongoing since the beginning of the Bourbons' exile, the Haitian Revolution had not been discussed as to properly examine the ramifications. Haiti used to be the most profitable colony of the French. This is mostly due to the fact that they had a severe amount of slaves in the sugar plantations. Eventually, the Haitians would liberate themselves and declare independence. In our timeline, this revolution had been occurring while the colony of Saint Dominique was technically a French Republican territory. However, the Bourbons had been facing several independence wars and foreign engagements with the French, Iberians, and Americans. This long guerrilla conflict would eventually end with Haiti controlling the entirety of Hispaniola, but the reason why this had been accomplished was due to the British and their interference. Once again, the British have intervened against Bourbon interests, allowing for their slaves to be freed and under British protection. There began to be a permanent distrust that the Bourbon subjects had for the British, and therefore the Bourbon monarchy itself. The Bourbon monarchy was completely dependent on the whims of the British and their support of their state. The Bourbon nobility began to chafe with the monarchy that they had sworn fealty to. These influential nobles would begin to scheme against their monarch, and eventually began to share the same ideas as the Peruvian and La Platans. The monarchy must be removed. The nobility would execute a coup, ousting the monarch and proclaiming a republic. The Republic of New Spain. The Republic of New Spain would sign a peace with the Americans, conceding land east of the Arkansas River, but maintaining control over New Orleans, and turning against the British. With the sudden complication of the mainland turning against them, the British had quickly signed a white peace with New Spain and America, allowing for the British to maintain their mainland American colonies. The Caribbean islands under Bourbon exile control had become their new home, with the Bourbons changing their capital to Havana. The British had subjugated the Bourbons utterly. Once the revolutions of France and Spain were put down, they would gladly restore their rightful place in Europe, but the British Empire would claim their rightful place as the empire that which the sun would never set. Would the British succeed in their gamble? How would Napoleon react to the foundation of New Spain? Would New Spain reform to become a liberal republic? Or did the nobility only ensure their continued domination of their subjects? What actions will the exiled Portuguese and Iberia take to secure their compromised diplomatic position? All of these questions and more will be answered in episode 4 of Project Bourbon, as the coalition wars continue. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Things are starting to get pretty interesting. I have a lot of really cool things planned for this scenario, and I'm looking forward to showing them to you. Please stay tuned because there's a lot more to come. Shout out to Ballin Aura University and Enzo Rafael Souza Silva for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. If you've been thinking that somebody deserves a compliment, you should probably give it to them. I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.